Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about the upside potential of HBAR, why it might not have been realizing that upside potential yet, and a catalyst that I think could really propel HBAR up onto the next leg of this market cycle. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So with this channel, we talk a lot about our risk indicators, and one of the indicators that we've created that we've been looking at here is the one for HBAR. And this indicator that I'm showing you a graph of here, it really just basically determines when the asset is high or low risk, when it has high upside potential, or when it maybe has more downside potential to be realized. Now, HBAR is an asset we've actually been talking about a good amount on this channel, and one of the reasons for that is that our model, our UDPI, upside downside potential indicator, has been getting more and more bullish on HBAR recently. You'll see that as we've gone into this correction, what I'm showing here is the price history of HBAR over time. As we've gone into this more recent correction, you'll see that the risk level has been falling. So these are color-coded, the days are color-coded based on the output of the risk indicator. You'll see it's falling. It's actually hit a green zone. It's actually gotten down to these zones, and we can see this specifically if I just show it in this point. This is the current risk level for HBAR, and it's sitting at negative 1.46, and this suggests that the upside potential for HBAR now outweighs the downside potential by a decent margin. You know, we're well below zero now, which is kind of that break-even point. So what I want to talk about today is, you know, this suggests that the model thinks that HBAR has a lot of upside potential to realize, and HBAR proponents have forever been saying that from a fundamental perspective, HBAR has a ton of upside potential. You know, one of the things that people talk a lot about with HBAR is just the technology that underlies it. I won't go into too much detail about that here, but essentially the idea is that people often will cite the fact that HBAR uses this kind of novel hash graph as being an alternative to more traditional blockchains, and that allows for things like high scalability, high throughput, you know, cheap transactions, security, all those kind of things. And if you just look at Twitter or at Reddit at the different, you know, HBAR or Hedera Hashgraph subreddits or just tweets about it, a common theme you'll see is people saying that it's really undervalued, that they just don't think that the market is properly assessing the value of HBAR. And so maybe that's true. Maybe the market is just irrational. It's just not valuing HBAR enough, and maybe just with enough time, the market will see the potential of HBAR and it'll appreciate in price up to where people kind of think it should be. But what I want to talk about today is maybe one thing that the market currently values that HBAR might not have as much, and then how HBAR acquiring this particular aspect might actually really help it into the future. And personally, what I think is kind of the big thing that the market has been valuing recently, this is something we've been talking a lot about on this channel, is this idea of having an ecosystem, and specifically a DeFi ecosystem. So in coming out of the summer, one of the big kind of narratives was that Ethereum, being this really expensive layer 1 protocol, you know, really expensive in the context of transaction fees, you know, it costs a lot of money just to transact on Ethereum. There was kind of this narrative that formed that the market was looking for alternatives, for things that were cheaper, that you could do things like DeFi on those protocols, but not spend, you know, $50 to $100 on just transactions using those protocols. And so things like the Binance Smart Chain, and then especially things like Solana really exploded coming out of this summer. And then more recent protocols like AVAX or Avalanche has really been exploding, and I would argue really on the back of its DeFi ecosystem, that it's really been able to grab up a lot of DeFi market share. You know, it now sits here at number 4 in terms of just DeFi market share. And that would suggest that maybe the market is really valuing these protocols that have a lot of DeFi development. By the way, this is DeFi Llama that I'm looking at this. So if you want to look at these charts yourself, that's where you can go ahead and find them. And one of the other reasons why I think the market really values this is just in how some other layer 1 protocols have also been acting recently. So Elrond, I think, is a really interesting one to look at. You know, Elrond recently had a big incentive program that was launched for its kind of new DEX that got launched on it. There was this very juicy kind of incentive program that was going on with that. And Elrond saw a massive spike in the total value that got locked on its protocol kind of as a result of that. And also as part of that, Elrond's price went parabolic. You know, if you've been watching Elrond over the past couple of weeks, you know, it put in a really nice rally. Even when the market has been kind of slumping more recently, Elrond showed a lot of strength. It's now correcting off of that, but have put in a pretty decent move to the upside. And I would argue that in large part that's because of this new development that's been going on in Elrond, all this value that's been locked on there, and that has seemingly drawn a lot of interest by a lot of market participants, and a lot of value has been placed on the network. And so I think if we just look at market caps, we can also just see this visually of how these layer 1 protocols seem to be valued. So obviously Ethereum's sitting at number 2. Ethereum's Ethereum. It's the big dog. But then these other layer 1s, these kind of competitors in the sense of ecosystem plays, have also been doing quite well. Binance Smart Chain is now sitting here over $100 billion in market cap. That's quite impressive. Solana, $60 billion, sitting at number 5. Kind of that meteoric rise coming out of the summer. I would argue in no small part due to its ecosystem development and the kind of shifting of money to Solana away from places like Ethereum, and really bringing the value up. Then we have Avalanche that recently just went nuts, sitting at $25 billion. Terra is up there at $20 billion. Terra is another one that's sitting pretty high up here in the total value locked on its protocol. And then also Polygon has been doing quite well recently, sitting over $11 billion. And so obviously, the HBAR proponents, we'd like to see HBAR be up there as well. If you're a HBAR bull, if you think it's a really strong protocol, sitting down here at $6 billion, that doesn't seem right. I think a lot of HBAR proponents would say that it should be right up here with the big dogs. That why is it not in the top 10, for example? And so what I'm going to argue is that HBAR might not have realized that upside potential yet, possibly because it doesn't have that DeFi development yet on its protocol. And there's several reasons why I think DeFi development is just so important, beyond just looking at these other layer 1s that have been exploding on the back of their DeFi development. One of the things that DeFi does is just brings interest into the network. People have this new use case for the network that they can go, they can earn yield on their different assets, and look for new protocols that might offer kind of innovative or exciting ways of doing that. And so that can bring in this kind of network effect where there's a lot of word of mouth that people get really interested in it. They go use it, they tell other people about it, they talk about those protocols that are on the network, then people end up going in and start using that network because they want to use those decentralized finance protocols. It just brings in a lot of interest. The other thing it does is it gives another reason to hold the assets. With HBAR, currently it's largely kind of an investment. I mean, obviously people are using the network, and so you have to have HBAR to use the network. But a lot of people are just holding it as an investment, just hoping it'll appreciate in price because they believe in the project, etc. But having DeFi on the protocol would also give another reason to hold the asset. You would need HBAR to use decentralized finance protocols on HBAR. That gives another reason for people to buy it, to have it, because they want to use those things. So even if they're locking up different assets in the DeFi, they're not locking up HBAR, they would still need HBAR just to use those protocols. So it gives another spur, another area of demand for the particular asset. And so kind of all of those things together might be why these DeFi plays are really being successful right now. That not only does the market seem to be valuing them, but then there's also just more kind of fundamental reasons why having DeFi on the platform is beneficial for demand for the native token of that asset. So if having a DeFi ecosystem would be useful for HBAR, I think the useful question to ask then is, where do we stand? Is that kind of development coming? Has HBAR been taking steps to maybe bring that about? And then maybe are those things setting HBAR up to have a burgeoning, DeFi ecosystem, a growing DeFi ecosystem that could launch it into the future? And I think the good news is that there's a lot of yeses onto those questions, that HBAR has been doing a lot of things that I think are potentially setting it up well for the future if it wants to kind of develop this kind of ecosystem. So one thing that HBAR has added recently is actually this ability to interoperate with Ethereum and Polygon. And again, Ethereum being this kind of big dog where a lot of the DeFi action is right now, then also Polygon being pretty high up there. If HBAR or Hedera Hashgraph did want to create a DeFi ecosystem, having this interoperability could be very beneficial. It can make it a lot easier for people to bring in assets from the Ethereum blockchain, from the Polygon blockchain, into HBAR to do their DeFi on the Hedera Hashgraph protocol. Using and then using HBAR as the currency for those things, as the native token that they would need for all those transactions. So I think that is a good step. Another thing that's good to see is that USDC has been added to the Hashgraph network. And this is, of course, useful because stablecoins like USDC are used a lot in DeFi. You know, people like to have stablecoins as kind of this medium of exchange for DeFi, that you can either, you know, put up stablecoins as collateral to borrow against, or maybe you know, use the stablecoin in a trading pair if you're providing liquidity to a decentralized exchange, etc. There's a lot of uses where having a stablecoin on the network is very beneficial. So I think this is a great sign that HBAR has this. And I think now kind of the bigger news, and this is a little bit old news at this point, being discussed back in September, is just the amount of money that Hedera Hashgraph is putting towards development on its protocol, and no small part of that is probably going to also go into DeFi. So, you know, $5.7 billion is a lot of money to be investing in development, and it's actually quite a bit larger than a lot of those other protocols had been doing to incentivize development on their blockchains. And so if even just a good chunk of this goes into DeFi, that could really be an incentive for new players to come in, build their decentralized finance apps on Hedera Hashgraph rather than one of the competitors, which then could bring in demand as well. So I think that is a quite bullish thing. And then, of course, more recently, you know, we actually do have the first DeFi project being launched on HBAR or on Hedera Hashgraph soon. It's coming soon, and that project is this act.io. And so here's the page here. They're actually launching an ICO fairly soon, within the next day as I record this, and so this will likely go live soon. Now, I'm not going to get too far into what act.io is. It's really just kind of an earning platform where I think it's powered by Aave, or that kind of idea where you can, you know, put up liquidity and then people can borrow, and you can earn interest basically on your assets. But really kind of the novel thing about this protocol is that it promises to use this kind of AI-driven system where it can kind of automate your investment for you to try to maximize your yields or kind of give you better outcomes. Again, if you're interested in this protocol, I encourage you to go do your own research, look into it yourself. What I'm more kind of just interested in with this in general is I think it's a good step in the right direction, right? You know, having the first DeFi app to launch on HBAR or on Hedera Hashgraph is great. And I personally would love to see a lot more. You know, if there is a lot of money that's being put forward to incentivize development on Hedera, on the Hedera network, I would love to see more of this DeFi come about. Because again, if DeFi is really this driver that's been pushing a lot of these competitors to Ethereum up in the rankings, really making their market caps just explode, like Avalanche more recently, or Solana before that, if HBAR can really start grabbing up some of this DeFi market share here, if it can really start eating into this pie, either taking away from the Ethereum competitors or just taking away from Ethereum itself, again, with that interoperability that's being developed now for Ethereum and Polygon, it might be in a great position now to really be able to grab some of that share from Ethereum. If people just want to take those assets that they have on Ethereum, move to a cheaper network like, you know, HBAR, that could be great. And there's reasons with the Hedera network that you might want to do that. You know, with Ethereum having such expensive transaction fees, I think one of the great things about the Hedera network is the fact that they peg transaction fees to the US dollar, and it's incredibly cheap. You know, I think it's about a 10,000th of a cent it costs to transact on the Hedera network. You know, and that's stable. You know, that's constant. That's always going to be pegged to the US dollar. It's not about the price of HBAR. So HBAR could go to a crazy valuation. It would still cost the same amount to transact on the network unless the governing council were to decide to change those rates like it theoretically could. But for now, it's incredibly cheap, and I think it probably would just stay that way. I don't really see why they would change that. And so there could be a lot of reasons that people would want to move to the Hedera network for DeFi just because of how incredibly cheap it is. You know, it's even cheaper than these competitors. It's even cheaper than things like AVAX, you know, which is still cheap, but it, you know, demarks its transaction fees by AVAX. You know, it's a fraction of an AVAX to transact. It's not pegged to the US dollar. You know, HBAR or the transaction on the Hedera network is pegged to the US dollar, and so you're not having to be paying more just because the value of HBAR is increasing. And I think that could be another reason why people might prefer to do things like DeFi on the Hedera network if given the opportunity. So the long and short of what I'm arguing here is that I think there's reason to be bullish for HBAR from this perspective that this DeFi development is coming. But what I'm personally going to be looking for is how much development does happen and how quickly it happens. I think if we see an explosion of development on Hedera, that could be a really bullish sign, and maybe it will then be able to start rising through the ranks pretty precipitously, pretty quickly, if it's able to really capture that growth. You know, we just saw what Elrond was able to do off of just one decentralized protocol on its network that put out a incentive program. You know, imagine if HBAR had a bunch of those protocols that all had a lot of incentives or nice yield offerings. That might really bring in some demand. But again, the other thing here is if HBAR isn't able to do that, then that would make me a little bit concerned. I would really like to see them do that. Now again, that doesn't take away from the fact that HBAR, you know, if you believe that HBAR has strong fundamentals from a technology side, you know, maybe you just think that that'll eventually become valued with time, and you're not really too worried about this more short-term value that the market is placing on DeFi. But I do think that if HBAR is able to capture some of that DeFi market share, that could be a really great sign for it and could really propel it forward. So those are just my thoughts. Curious to hear what you think in the comments. So if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with the UDPI, we're all going to make it.